Did you hear? Harvard showed that Tylenol causes autism. And Johns Hopkins, both leading medical universities, so it must be true, right? Problem with social media is anybody can put anything on there and claim authority without actually fact-checking if it's true. First of all, the Harvard study is not actually a study. It was a review of existing papers by several authors, one of whom is the dean of the Harvard School of Public Health. The same dean that was paid $150,000 to testify in a lawsuit against the manufacturers of Tylenol. And the judge in that case threw out his testimony because he cherry-picked and misrepresented study results and refused to acknowledge the role of genetics. But back to what they're calling the Harvard paper. They looked at 46 actual studies. Was it that all 46 showed that there's an association between acetaminophen and autism? No. 27, there was a positive association, there was an increased risk. 9 showed no difference, and then 4 showed a negative association, meaning a protective effect. There was a lower risk of autism. And they say specifically observational limitations preclude definitive causation. Observational studies are just looking at patterns. They're looking to see what is happening. They don't actually show that this thing causes this thing. They also mentioned that there are risks of not treating fever, and acetaminophen is the most safe medication to treat fever in pregnancy. So they recommend that they're not talking about a broad limitation. I found it very interesting that the quote-unquote Harvard study spent a lot of time discrediting the larger studies, like the huge one out of Sweden that actually looked at sibling matched pairs as a way to adjust for genetic or environmental factors, and with that found that there was no significant difference anymore. They also talked about adjusting for confounders quite a bit, but didn't mention a lot about, like, most of the studies didn't ask, do the parents have autism? Because as far as we know, based on good literature, that's probably one of the biggest contributing factors is inheritance. I also really side-eyed this line. They said that a causal relationship is definitely possible because as time has gone on, acetaminophen has become the recommended pain reliever because we know that NSAIDs like ibuprofen are more dangerous. The rates of ADHD and ASD have increased over 20-fold over the past decades because nothing else has changed over the past couple of decades, only Tylenol use. We haven't had the rise of social media, we haven't had increased awareness, better diagnostic criteria leading to increased diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. The Johns Hopkins study looked at amounts of acetaminophen and metabolites of acetaminophen in cord blood of women delivering in Boston. And they showed there was an association between the amount of these metabolites and the likelihood of ADHD and autism, except number one, there was no comparison group. 100% of the people that they tested had some evidence of acetaminophen, just showing how widespread this use is. They also say outright that this should not be interpreted that acetaminophen is causing these disorders. And Johns Hopkins PR rushed to say on their social media, associations do not prove causality. Don't pin this on us. Punchline, there is a huge difference between someone who quote unquote does their research because they just shared something they saw on Twitter versus somebody who actually is trained, like I am, with my Harvard and Columbia degrees in medicine and public health, who's going to really scrutinize the data and tell you whether it can justify the conclusions that someone else has drawn about it.